The year was 2247, and Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the ESS Defiant watching his world die. Through the main view screen he could see Earth burning below, its blue and green surface now covered with spots of orange fire and black smoke. The Velcron ships swarmed around the planet like insects, their dark hulls blocking out the stars as they fired weapon after weapon into the cities below. Jake's hands gripped the railing in front of him so hard that his knuckles turned white, but he could not look away from the destruction. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez sat at the tactical station calling out reports in a voice that shook with barely controlled emotion. Mars Colony had gone silent 20 minutes ago. The moon bases had fallen an hour before that. Europa Station sent its final distress signal, and then nothing but static remained on that channel. Every report was worse than the last, and Jake felt his hope dying with each word she spoke. The Velcron Dominion had appeared in human space 3 months ago without warning or mercy. Their first message was not a greeting but a demand for complete surrender. When humanity refused, they attacked with overwhelming force. The Velcron had technology that made human weapons look like toys, and they had numbers that blotted out entire sections of space when their fleets gathered. Humanity fought back with everything they had, but it was like trying to stop an ocean with a bucket. Jake had been in space for 15 years, and he had seen combat before, but nothing like this. The defense fleet that once numbered in the hundreds now counted only dozens of ships. The orbital platforms that protected Earth were nothing but debris clouds now. Every defensive line humanity drew, the Velcron simply rolled over it and kept coming. Jake did not know how to win this fight. He was not even sure how to survive it anymore. The communication panel lit up with an incoming message marked with the highest priority encryption. Jake moved to the command chair and accepted the signal. Admiral Patricia Hoffman's face appeared on the screen, and Jake barely recognized her. The woman who had always seemed so strong and confident now looked decades older. Her eyes held something Jake had never seen there before. It looked like sadness mixed with something else he could not quite identify. Admiral Hoffman did not waste time with pleasantries. She spoke quickly, and her words were clipped and precise. All remaining military vessels were to execute Protocol Nightfall immediately. Jake felt his stomach drop. He knew that name. Every officer above a certain rank knew that name, but none of them knew what it actually meant. It was one of those classified orders that existed in files no one ever expected to open. Jake started to ask what Protocol Nightfall entailed, but Hoffman cut him off. The orders were being transmitted to his ship now. He was to follow them exactly without question or delay. She told him that this was not a retreat and it was not a regroup. This was something else entirely. Her voice softened slightly when she told him to trust her. She said that humanity was not done fighting yet. Then she ended the transmission before Jake could respond. The orders appeared on his command screen, and Jake read them twice because they made no sense. He was to break off all engagement with Velcron forces immediately. He was to gather any civilian ships or escape pods in his vicinity. Then he was to proceed at maximum speed to a set of coordinates in deep space beyond the Kuiper Belt. The coordinates meant nothing to him. There was nothing out there but empty space and ice. First Officer Danny Green stood beside Jake and read the orders over his shoulder. Danny had served with Jake for 10 years, and they had been through more battles than either could count. Danny looked at Jake with confusion and something close to horror on his face. He asked if this meant they were abandoning Earth. Jake did not answer because he did not know what else it could mean. Amy turned from her station, and Jake could see tears running down her face. She asked if they were really going to leave. Her family was down there somewhere in the burning cities. Her mother and her brother and her nephew, who was only 5 years old. Jake wanted to tell her they would stay and fight, but he knew that would be a lie. The Defiant was damaged and low on ammunition. They would last maybe 10 more minutes in a direct fight with the Velcron. Staying here meant dying and accomplishing nothing. Jake gave the order to execute Protocol Nightfall. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, flat and emotionless like he was reading from a script. The crew moved to follow his commands, but there was no energy in their movements. They had already given up hope. They were going through the motions because that was all they knew how to do anymore. The Defiant turned away from Earth and began moving toward the outer system. They picked up 3 civilian ships on the way and 2 escape pods full of survivors from destroyed vessels. The civilians asked where they were going, and Jake told them he did not know. That answer seemed to satisfy no one, but it was the only truth he had to offer. As they left Earth behind, Jake stood at the observation window watching the planet shrink in the distance. He could still see the Velcron ships descending through the atmosphere. He could see the flashes of weapons fire and the glow of burning cities. Somewhere down there, millions of people were dying, and he was running away. The guilt felt like a weight crushing his chest. Danny came to stand beside him, and they watched in silence for a long time. Finally, Danny spoke and asked if Jake thought they would ever see Earth again. Jake did not answer. He did not trust his voice not to break if he tried to speak. The Velcron broadcast started an hour after the Defiant cleared Earth's orbit. It came through on every frequency and in every human language. War Sovereign Thexnar appeared on the screens throughout the ship. He was tall and covered in dark scales with eyes that glowed like burning coals. He spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding metal, and his words were simple and brutal. Humanity was defeated. Earth belonged to the Velcron Dominion now. Any humans who remained would serve as slaves or die. The free species called humanity was extinct. Their chapter in galactic history was over. The broadcast ended and silence filled the bridge of the Defiant. No one moved or spoke. What could anyone say after hearing that? Jake looked around at his crew and saw the same expression on every face: defeat, despair. The look of people who had lost everything and saw no path forward. But then Jake remembered something Admiral Hoffman had said. She told him humanity was not done fighting yet. She had looked sad when she said it, but underneath that sadness was something else, something that might have been hope or determination or maybe both. Jake did not know what waited at those coordinates in deep space, but Hoffman seemed to think it mattered. She seemed to think it could change things. Jake made a decision then. He would follow the orders. He would take his ship and his crew to whatever waited out there in the dark. Maybe it would be nothing. Maybe they would arrive at empty space and that would be the end. But maybe there was something else. Maybe Admiral Hoffman knew something the rest of them did not. The Defiant continued into the outer system, leaving Earth and its fires behind. Jake stood on the bridge and watched the stars ahead. Somewhere out there in the void was either salvation or final defeat. In 3 weeks they would find out which one. 3 weeks of silent running through deep space felt like 3 years to Jake Morrison. The Defiant moved through the darkness with its engines at minimum power, and all non-essential systems shut down to avoid detection. Around them traveled 73 other military vessels and more than twice that many civilian ships. They were all that remained of humanity's presence in space. Every single ship carried people who had lost everything, and Jake could feel the weight of their despair pressing down on him with each passing day. The coordinates Admiral Hoffman had given them led to a region of space that should have been empty. There were no planets here and no resources worth claiming. The star charts showed nothing but void and the occasional chunk of ice drifting through the black. Jake checked the coordinates 5 times, thinking there must be a mistake, but the numbers never changed. Whatever waited for them was exactly where Hoffman said it would be. When they finally arrived, Jake thought at first that his sensors were malfunctioning. The screens showed empty space just as he expected, but then Amy Rodriguez ran a deep scan and suddenly something appeared that had not been there a moment before. It was a structure so massive that Jake's mind struggled to understand the scale of it. The thing was easily 3 times larger than any space station humanity had ever constructed, and it hung in the void like a sleeping giant. Amy's voice shook when she reported what the sensors were detecting. The station was surrounded by a network of stealth satellites and gravitational camouflage systems that bent light and sensor beams around it. No one would ever find this place unless they knew exactly where to look. Jake realized that this was intentional. Someone had built this station and then hidden it from the entire galaxy. The question was who and why. But that question was answered when Jake looked at what was docked to the station. 7 ships floated there attached to docking clamps and power umbilicals. They were unlike anything Jake had ever seen in his 15 years of military service. Each one was massive and angular, with hull plating that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They bristled with weapon systems that Jake could not even identify, and their armor looked thick enough to shrug off anything the Velcron might throw at them. These were not exploration vessels or even standard warships. These were ships built for one purpose only: war on a scale that humanity had never attempted before. Admiral Hoffman's face appeared on every screen in the refugee fleet. She looked older than Jake remembered, but there was something different in her eyes now. The sadness was still there, but it was mixed with determination and maybe even a hint of pride. She began to speak, and what she said changed everything Jake thought he knew about his own government and military. 30 years ago, humanity made first contact with an alien species. The official story was that it went well and led to peaceful trade agreements. That was a lie. The first contact had turned hostile almost immediately, and humanity barely escaped with a handful of survivors. The encounter taught the leaders of Earth a terrible lesson. The galaxy was not a friendly place, and humanity's peaceful intentions meant nothing to species that saw us as weak. A secret committee was formed after that encounter. They called it Project Sovereign Spear, and its mission was simple: build weapons that could ensure humanity's survival against any alien threat. The project consumed resources on a scale that would have caused riots if the public knew. Money was diverted through black budgets and classified military contracts. Scientists and engineers were recruited and sworn to absolute secrecy. Construction facilities were established in deep space where no one would ever find them. The 7 ships docked at the station were the result of 30 years of secret work. They were called Dreadnoughts, and each one carried enough firepower to face down an entire fleet. Their weapons were experimental systems that humanity had never deployed in combat before. Mass accelerator cannons that could punch through any known shield technology, plasma lance arrays that could cut capital ships in half with sustained fire, quantum torpedoes that could phase through conventional defenses and detonate inside enemy hulls. The armor used nanotechnology that could repair damage automatically. The engines could push these ships to speeds that would tear apart standard vessels. Hoffman explained that the Dreadnoughts had never been tested in actual combat. Everything was based on simulations and theoretical models. The crews had trained for years running drills and practicing tactics, but they had no real experience. There were only 7 ships against an empire that fielded thousands. The odds were still overwhelmingly against humanity, but now at least they had a chance to fight back. Captain Nicole Brennan appeared on the screens next. She was the commander of the flagship called the EWS Retribution. She looked to be in her early 40s with short dark hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her voice was calm and steady when she spoke to the assembled fleet. She did not make promises about victory or guarantees about survival. Instead, she was brutally honest. Many of them would die in the fighting to come. The Velcrin were still more numerous and still occupied Earth. Taking back their homeworld would require sacrifice on a scale that none of them could imagine. But then Nicole said something that made Jake stand a little straighter. She said that humanity would not go quietly into extinction. The Velcron believed they had won. They thought humanity was defeated and broken. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Humanity would take the fight back to the invaders. They would make the Velcron pay for every world they had taken and every life they had destroyed. And they would reclaim Earth no matter the cost. Jake found himself reassigned to the Retribution within hours of arrival. He was made the strike group commander responsible for coordinating support vessels during combat operations. Amy Rodriguez came with him along with hundreds of other officers pulled from the surviving fleet. The rest of the refugees would remain at the station, which had been named Forge Station Omega. It was protected by defensive systems and stealth technology that would keep them safe while the Dreadnoughts went to war. Jake walked through the corridors of the Retribution feeling overwhelmed by the scale of everything. The ship was enormous and every surface was covered with systems and equipment he did not recognize. The crew moved with purpose and precision. They had trained for this moment for years, and now that it was here they seemed almost eager to begin. Jake envied their confidence. He had seen what the Velcron could do, and he knew that even these impressive ships might not be enough. He found his way to the Strategic Command Center where he would coordinate operations. The room was filled with displays and control stations. Amy was already there studying tactical readouts and running simulations. She looked up when Jake entered and gave him a small smile. She said that the Dreadnoughts changed everything. They actually had a chance now. Jake wanted to believe her, but he had learned not to trust hope anymore. Hope had died when Earth burned. Nicole Brennan gathered the entire crew in the main hangar bay that evening. Thousands of people stood in formation looking up at their captain as she addressed them from a raised platform. She did not give them an inspiring speech full of empty words. Instead, she told them the truth. They were about to go into combat against an enemy that outnumbered them hundreds to one. Many of them would not survive. The Velcron would not show mercy and humanity could offer none in return. This was a war for survival, and either humanity would win or humanity would cease to exist. But then Nicole's voice changed. It became harder and colder. She said that the Velcron made a mistake when they attacked Earth. They thought humanity was weak because we pursued peace. They confused our compassion for cowardice and our restraint for inability. They believed we could not fight back. The 7 Dreadnoughts would teach them otherwise. Humanity would show the galaxy what we became when pushed to the edge of extinction. The hangar erupted in shouts and cheers. Jake found himself shouting along with everyone else. For the first time since Earth fell, he felt something other than despair. It was anger and determination mixed together. The Velcron had taken his world and killed millions of his people. Now humanity had weapons that could strike back. The war was not over. It was only beginning. The Dreadnoughts powered up their main drives and the entire ship hummed with barely contained energy. Jake stood in the command center watching the tactical display as all 7 ships detached from Forge Station Omega. They formed up into a combat formation and began accelerating toward the inner system. Behind them, the refugee fleet watched from the observation decks. Children pressed their hands against the glass. Parents held each other tight. They were all that remained of humanity, and they were placing everything on 7 ships and their crews. Jake looked at the faces around him in the command center. These people were strangers to him, but they would be his family now. They would fight together and possibly die together. He thought about Earth burning and about all the people who did not escape. He thought about the Velcron and their declaration that humanity was extinct. Then he looked at the tactical display showing 7 massive warships heading into battle. The Velcron proclaimed victory, but they did not know what was coming for them. From the void, the Dreadnoughts had emerged and humanity was ready. The Velcron had spread their forces thin across the solar system, confident that humanity no longer posed any threat. Their fleets occupied Earth and Mars, while smaller garrison forces had been sent to secure the outer mining installations and research stations. It was one of these smaller garrisons that Nicole Brennan selected as the first target for the Dreadnought strike group. She wanted to test the new ships in actual combat before committing to larger engagements, and she wanted to do it against an enemy that would not expect them. The mining complex at Titan was held by 12 Velcron warships. Intelligence reports suggested they were supply vessels and escorts, not frontline combat ships, but they were still more than capable of destroying any standard human vessel. The garrison commander probably thought this was an easy assignment, far from the real fighting. He was about to learn otherwise. The Dreadnoughts dropped out of faster-than-light travel at point-blank range. One moment the Velcron sensors showed empty space, and the next moment, 7 massive human warships materialized directly in front of them. Jake watched from the tactical command center aboard the Retribution as the Velcron scrambled to respond. Their ships began emergency maneuvers and powered up weapons, but they were already too late. Nicole Brennan had positioned her fleet perfectly, and now she gave the order to open fire. The EWS Unyielding fired first. Its mass accelerator cannons launched tungsten slugs the size of small cars at a significant fraction of light speed. The projectiles punched through the shields of a Velcron cruiser like they were not even there. The alien ship's armor buckled and tore as the slugs ripped through its hull. Secondary explosions bloomed along its length as systems overloaded and reactors lost containment. Within seconds, the cruiser was dead in space and venting atmosphere. The other Dreadnoughts opened fire in a carefully choreographed sequence. The EWS Vengeance demonstrated its plasma lance arrays sweeping concentrated beams of superheated matter across 3 Velcron destroyers simultaneously. Jake watched in amazement as the alien ships simply melted under the assault. Their hulls glowed white-hot, and then collapsed as the metal turned to vapor. There was no time for the crews to evacuate. One moment the ships existed, and the next they were expanding clouds of gas and debris. The Velcron finally managed to return fire, but their weapons seemed almost pathetic against the Dreadnought armor. Plasma bolts that would cripple standard human ships barely scorched the hull plating. Missile salvos were intercepted by point defense systems that tracked and eliminated each threat with mechanical precision. Jake had seen the technical specifications for the Dreadnought defenses, but watching them in action was something else entirely. These ships were built to take punishment and keep fighting. The EWS Relentless launched a spread of quantum torpedoes at a Velcron battleship that was trying to maneuver into a better firing position. The torpedoes phased through the battleship's shields without triggering them. They passed through the outer hull like it was not even solid matter. Then they materialized inside the ship's reactor core and detonated. The battleship exploded from the inside out. Its back broke in half and both sections tumbled away, trailing fire and bodies. The battle lasted 17 minutes from first shot to final kill. When it was over, 12 Velcron warships were destroyed and not a single human vessel had taken critical damage. The EWS Defiance reported some minor scoring on its forward armor from a lucky hit, but the nanotechnology was already repairing the damage. Jake looked at the tactical display showing the debris field where the Velcron garrison used to be, and he felt a savage satisfaction. This was what humanity could do when we stopped holding back. The mining complex was liberated, and its human workers freed from Velcron captivity. They came aboard the Dreadnoughts looking thin and scared, but their eyes lit up when they saw the massive human warships. One of the workers was a man named Gregory Phillips, who had been the mining supervisor before the invasion. He provided crucial intelligence that changed everything. The Velcron were establishing a major supply depot at Europa to support their occupation of Earth. The depot was lightly defended because they believed humanity posed no further threat. Brennan saw the opportunity immediately. Destroying the depot would disrupt Velcron operations throughout the inner system and force them to divert resources. More importantly, it would send a message that humanity was not defeated. She called a command meeting and laid out her plan. They would jump to Europa in 3 days, which would give the fleet time to rearm and repair. Jake pointed out that hitting a target so close to Earth was risky. If things went wrong, the Velcron could bring in reinforcements quickly. Nicole acknowledged the risk but said the potential gain was worth it. 3 days later, the Dreadnought strike group emerged from faster-than-light travel near Europa, and Jake's heart sank. The intelligence was wrong or had been leaked somehow. Instead of a lightly defended depot, they faced a full battle fleet. 40 Velcron warships surrounded the moon, with more jumping in every few minutes. At the center of the formation was a massive command carrier, easily twice the size of any ship Jake had ever seen. This was not a garrison force. This was a trap. Amy Rodriguez identified the command carrier from its signature. It belonged to Fleet Commander Zaxel, who was one of the Velcron's most decorated war leaders. He had conquered 3 other species and destroyed countless resistance movements. Now he had the human dreadnoughts exactly where he wanted them. The odds were 6-1 and climbing as more Velcron ships arrived. Nicole did not hesitate. She ordered all ships into attack formation Delta. Jake had practiced this maneuver hundreds of times in simulation, but never in real combat. The 7 dreadnoughts formed a spearhead configuration with the Retribution at the point. They would punch through the weakest section of the Velcron formation and try to reach the command carrier. If they could kill Zaxel, the rest of his fleet might break and run. The dreadnoughts accelerated to attack speed, and Jake felt the deck vibrate beneath his feet. Every weapon system on every ship charged to maximum output. The Velcron formation began moving to intercept, but they were too slow. Nicole had calculated the approach perfectly, and now there was nothing the enemy could do to stop them. The space between the 2 fleets filled with weapons fire. Plasma bolts and missiles crossed paths with mass accelerator slugs and torpedo spreads. The EWS Defiance took heavy fire as it moved to protect the flagship. Its armor blackened and cracked under the assault but held. Jake watched the damage reports coming in and marveled at how much punishment the ship could absorb. Any standard vessel would have been destroyed 3 times over, but the Defiance just kept fighting. The EWS Reckoning performed a maneuver that Jake would have thought impossible. It used its superior engines to loop up and over the Velcron formation, catching them from behind. Now the enemy was taking fire from 2 directions, and their formation began to break apart. Ships collided as they tried to maneuver in the suddenly chaotic battlefield. The dreadnoughts exploited every mistake with ruthless efficiency. Amy Rodriguez had been given command of a frigate squadron for this battle. Jake watched her tactical display as she led her ships in a desperate assault on the command carrier's escort vessels. Her frigates were tiny compared to the Velcron warships, but they were fast and her crews were determined. They darted in and out of weapons range, launching missiles and then retreating before the enemy could respond. One by one, the escort ships fell and the path to the command carrier opened up. Nicole locked the Retribution's main cannon onto the carrier. The weapon required 90 seconds to charge and drew power from every system on the ship. Life support dropped to minimum levels. The lights dimmed. Even the engines had to reduce output to feed the hungry weapon. Jake watched the charge indicator climb slowly while Velcron ships hammered the retribution with everything they had. The shields flickered and failed. Armor plating melted and peeled away. Damage reports flooded the command center, but Nicole ignored them all. Her eyes were fixed on the charge indicator and her hand was steady on the firing control. The cannon reached full charge and Nicole fired. The beam that erupted from the retribution was visible across half of Jupiter's orbit. It was pure concentrated energy that crossed the distance to the command carrier in less than a second. The beam struck the carrier's bow and burned through its entire length. Jake watched in awe as the massive ship came apart. Its shields overloaded and failed. Its armor vaporized. Its internal structure melted. The carrier broke in half and both pieces tumbled away, trailing fire and debris. Fleet Commander Zaxel's final transmission was a scream that cut off suddenly as his ship died around him. The carrier's reactors detonated in a chain reaction that took out 6 nearby Velcron ships. The explosion was so bright that the optical filters on every human ship automatically darkened to protect against the glare. The remaining Velcron forces panicked. They had watched their commander die and seen their most powerful ship destroyed. Some tried to continue fighting, but their formation was shattered. Others broke and ran, jumping away to safer locations. Within minutes, the battlefield belonged to humanity. The depot at Europa was destroyed and the Velcron had suffered their first major defeat. But victory came at a cost. The EWS. News of the Europa battle spread through both human and Velcron communication channels like wildfire. Among the scattered survivors hiding on occupied worlds and in asteroid bases, hope began to kindle for the first time since Earth fell. Resistance cells that had been laying low suddenly became active again. They started coordinating with the Dreadnought fleet, sending intelligence reports and conducting sabotage operations against Velcron supply lines. Humanity was fighting back, and that simple fact changed everything. The Velcron reaction was shock mixed with fury. War Sovereign Thexnar could not understand how the supposedly defeated humans possessed such advanced warships. His intelligence officers had no explanation, and their failure made him angrier. He made a decision born from pride and rage rather than tactical sense. Instead of gathering his scattered forces into one overwhelming fleet, he dispatched multiple large groups to hunt down and destroy the Dreadnoughts before they could strike again. It was exactly the mistake Nicole Brennan had been hoping he would make. Nicole divided her strike group and sent the Dreadnoughts out in pairs to engage the separated Velcron fleets. The strategy was dangerous because it spread their limited forces thin, but it created the illusion of a much larger human fleet. The Velcron would see Dreadnoughts attacking in multiple locations simultaneously, and believe humanity had more ships than actually existed. More importantly, it let the human forces pick their battles and only engage when they had favorable conditions. The EWS Indomitable and EWS Unyielding ambushed a Velcron supply convoy heading to Mars. The convoy had heavy escorts, but they were not prepared for the sudden appearance of 2 Dreadnoughts. The battle was short and brutal. When it ended, 15 Velcron ships were destroyed, and the human forces captured 5 intact supply vessels loaded with food and medicine and equipment. Nicole ordered the supplies distributed to resistance fighters on Mars, who used them to launch increasingly bold attacks against the occupation forces. The EWS Vengeance. An EWS Relentless intercepted a Velcron punitive fleet heading to destroy a civilian refuge station at Ceres. The Velcron had discovered that thousands of human civilians were hiding there and decided to make an example of them. The 2 Dreadnoughts arrived just hours before the Velcron fleet would have reached the station. The battle was fierce, and the Relentless took severe damage to its port weapon systems when a Velcron battleship got too close, but they drove off the enemy fleet and saved every civilian at the station. Those refugees were evacuated to Forge Station Omega, adding to humanity's numbers in exile. Jake commanded strike operations aboard the Retribution, working alongside the EWS Reckoning. They led a daring raid on a Velcron communication relay station orbiting Neptune. The station was heavily defended, and the battle to capture it cost them 3 frigates and a destroyer. Jake watched good people die to take that station, but the intelligence they gathered made the sacrifice worth it. The relay held encrypted Velcron military communications going back weeks. When the data was decrypted, it revealed something crucial. The Velcron were requesting reinforcements from their core worlds, But those fleets would not arrive for 3 months. If humanity could reclaim Earth before then, they would only face the occupation forces currently in the system. Admiral Hoffman and Nicole Brennan spent 2 days planning what would become known as Operation Homecoming. The plan was audacious to the point of being insane. They would launch a direct assault on the Velcron forces occupying Earth orbit. Every combat-capable ship in the refugee fleet would participate. The Dreadnoughts would lead the attack, supported by frigates and destroyers and even armed civilian vessels crewed by volunteers. The goal was not just to defeat the Velcron, but to shatter their command structure so completely that they would lose the will to continue fighting. The plan required perfect timing and deception. For 2 weeks, the Dreadnoughts conducted hit-and-run attacks throughout the outer system, always staying on the move and never engaging for long. War Sovereign Thexnar believed he had them trapped in a web of converging fleets. He committed his reserves to the pursuit, including ships that had been guarding Earth. It was exactly what Nicole wanted him to do. While Thexnar chased shadows, in the outer system the human fleet gathered, in secret, and prepared for a high-speed run directly at Earth, and they approached from the direction of the sun where Velcron sensors were weakest. The journey took 4 days of hard burn, pushing engines to their absolute limits. Ships that were barely held together with spare parts and determination somehow kept pace. Jake spent those 4 days moving through the fleet, talking to crews and listening to their stories. He met Lieutenant Kyle Bennett, whose entire family died when the Velcron bombed Denver. He spoke with Commander Lisa Torres, who lost her ship during Earth's fall and had been waiting months for a chance at revenge. He shared a meal with Chief Petty Officer George Carter, who joked that he kept his frigate running with tape and prayers. These were ordinary people who had been pushed into extraordinary circumstances. They were scared and exhausted and grieving, but they were also determined. Earth was their home and they were going to take it back or die trying. Jake saw that determination in every face he met, and it gave him strength. Whatever happened in the coming battle, these people would fight with everything they had. Amy Rodriguez was now captain of the destroyer ESS Dauntless after her promotion following the Europa battle. The night before the attack, she found Jake in the observation deck staring at the distant point of light that was Earth. She asked him if he thought they could actually win this fight. Jake was honest with her. The numbers were still against them, even with the Velcron forces divided. The Dreadnoughts were powerful but not invincible. They could all die tomorrow, and humanity's last hope would die with them. But Amy smiled with that fierce expression Jake had seen on her face so many times in combat. She said that even if they lost, the Velcron would remember this day. They would remember that humanity did not surrender when it would have been easier. They would remember the names of the ships that fought back. They would remember that humans chose to stand and fight even when victory seemed impossible. That alone was worth something. It meant humanity's story would not end with quiet extinction, but with defiance that echoed across the galaxy. The fleet dropped out of faster than light, travel at dawn over Earth. Nicole had chosen the timing, deliberately for its symbolism. Dawn meant hope and new beginnings. It meant that even after the darkest night, light would return. The Velcron occupation fleet was caught completely unprepared. They had grown comfortable in orbit around the conquered world. Their patrols were lax and their defensive formations weak. They never expected the defeated humans to return with such force. The 7 Dreadnoughts punched through the outer defensive line like hammers through glass. Every weapon system fired at maximum output. The Retribution led the charge, with Nicole's calm voice directing her ship into the heart of the enemy formation. The Velcron scrambled to respond, but their commanders were in chaos. War Sovereign Thexnar was still in the outer system, too far away to coordinate the defense. Local commanders who had faced no real resistance for months suddenly found themselves fighting for their lives against ships that outclassed them in every way. Jake coordinated the support fleet from his command station, routing squadrons to exploit gaps in the Velcron formation. Amy's destroyer squadron performed a brilliant flanking maneuver, destroying 3 Velcron cruisers before the enemy even knew they were there. The EWS Indomitable and EWS Unyielding formed a 2-ship wall, creating a killing zone that no Velcron vessel could cross. Ships that tried to break through were torn apart by overlapping fields of fire. The EWS Vengeance and EWS Relentless worked together like they shared one mind. They systematically dismantled the Velcron right flank, carving through ship after ship with their plasma lances. The EWS Defiance was still bearing scars from previous battles, but it proved why it carried that name. when a Velcran battleship broke through the formation and threatened civilian evacuation ships lifting off from Earth's surface, the Defiance moved directly into its path. For 7 brutal minutes, the Dreadnought absorbed punishment that should have destroyed it. Its armor buckled and cracked. Hull breaches vented atmosphere, but its weapons never stopped firing. Slowly and methodically, the Defiance tore the battleship apart. When the engagement ended, both ships were heavily damaged, but only the Defiance remained operational. Then, the EWS Reckoning, commanded by Captain Raymond Shaw, executed a maneuver that would be studied in military academies for generations. The ship accelerated to maximum speed and punched straight through the Velcran formation. As it passed through the enemy lines, it launched quantum torpedoes in every direction. The torpedoes phased harmlessly through the human ships, but materialized inside 24 Velcran vessels and detonated simultaneously. The enemy formation collapsed in confusion and panic. Admiral Hoffman gave the order that Jake had been waiting for. All resistance cells on Earth were to begin their uprisings. Around the planet, from ruined cities to mountain hideouts to ocean settlements, humanity rose up against their occupiers. The Velcran ground forces found themselves cut off from orbital support and facing attacks from all directions. Nicole Brennan stared at the tactical display showing War Sovereign Thexnar's approaching fleet and made a decision that Jake knew he would remember for the rest of his life. She announced that the Retribution would break off from the main battle and intercept Thexnar alone. The flagship would buy time for the rest of humanity's forces to secure Earth and complete the evacuation of ground forces. It was a suicide mission, and everyone in the command center knew it. One Dreadnought against nearly 100 Velcran warships had no chance of victory, but it might provide enough delay for humanity to win the larger battle. Jake protested immediately. Amy begged Nicole to reconsider. Other officers added their voices, arguing that losing the flagship and its commander would cripple the fleet. But Nicole's decision was final. She was the fleet commander, and this was her call to make. She started issuing orders with the same calm voice she always used. The other 6 Dreadnoughts would continue the assault on the occupation fleet. All support vessels would focus on protecting the civilian evacuation from Earth's surface. The Retribution would accelerate to intercept Thexnar's fleet at maximum speed. Nicole promoted Jake to temporary fleet commander and ordered him transferred to the EWS Indomitable. She told him to finish the battle and retake Earth and make sure humanity survived. Whatever happened to the Retribution, his mission was to ensure that her sacrifice meant something. Jake wanted to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. He had served with Nicole for months now, and he understood that look in her eyes. She had made peace with what was coming, and nothing he said would change her mind. The transfer was completed in minutes. Jake found himself on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the tactical display as the Retribution's icon moved away from Earth toward the approaching enemy fleet. Around him, the crew worked in silence. Everyone knew what was happening and what it meant. The flagship was going to die, and there was nothing any of them could do about it. The Retribution met Thexnar's fleet at the orbit of Luna. War Sovereign. Thexnar himself broadcast a message on all frequencies. His voice was full of contempt and anger. He demanded the Dreadnought's immediate surrender. He could not believe that a single ship would dare to face his entire fleet. It was an insult to his military prowess and to the power of the Velcran Dominion. He promised that if the ship surrendered now, the crew would be allowed to live as slaves. If they refused, he would personally ensure their deaths were slow and painful. Nicole Brennan's response was broadcast across every channel, both human and Velcran. Her voice was calm and measured without any trace of fear or anger. She told Thexnar that he made a fundamental mistake when he attacked Earth. He believed humanity was weak because we preferred peace. He thought our compassion was cowardice and our restraint was inability. He assumed that because we chose not to fight, we could not fight. He was wrong about all of it. She explained that the Dreadnoughts were not the limit of human capability. They were simply what humanity built in secret, while preparing for threats like the Velcran. She told him that if he retreated now and took his forces out of human space, the war could end. Enough people on both sides had died already. There was no honor in continuing this slaughter. But if he chose to press the attack, humanity would not stop with driving the Velcran from Earth. Human forces would pursue his fleets back to his home worlds. They would dismantle his empire piece by piece. They would show the entire galaxy what humans could do when pushed to the brink of extinction. Thexnar's response was to open fire with every weapon in his fleet. the space around the Retribution filled with plasma bolts and missiles and mass accelerator fire. The Dreadnoughts' shields lit up and overloaded within seconds. The armor that had withstood so much damage in previous battles began to melt under the concentrated assault. But Nicole did not try to evade or retreat. She rotated her ship to keep fresh armor facing the enemy as damaged sections cooled. She returned fire with every weapon system targeting the ships closest to her position. For 10 minutes, the Retribution stood alone against impossible odds. Jake watched from the Indomitable, unable to look away, even though every instinct told him to focus on his own battle. The flagship destroyed 16 Velcron ships in those 10 minutes. Its weapons never stopped firing, even as systems failed and hull breaches multiplied. The crew fought with desperate determination, keeping their ship operational through skill and willpower alone. Then, a Velcron torpedo penetrated deep into the Retribution's hull and detonated near the starboard reactor. The explosion caused a cascade failure that spread through 3 decks. Fire consumed entire sections of the ship. Nicole ordered all non-essential personnel to the escape pods, but most of her crew refused to leave. They had fought beside her for too long to abandon her now. They would see this through to the end together. The main cannon reached full charge one final time. Nicole targeted Thexnar's flagship at the center of the enemy formation. She spoke one last message that was recorded and would be played at ceremonies for generations to come. She said that humanity bought this moment with blood and sacrifice. She told everyone listening to make it count. Then she fired. The beam crossed the distance in an instant, striking the flagship's bow and burning through its entire length. War Sovereign Thexnar's ship exploded in a cascade of secondary detonations that consumed everything within a kilometer radius. The War Sovereign died without time to comprehend his defeat. His flagship took out 6 nearby vessels as its reactors melted down and detonated. Then the remaining Velcron fleet concentrated all fire on the Retribution. The Dreadnought had given everything it had, and there was nothing left to give. The ship broke apart under the final assault. Nicole Brennan and most of her crew died instantly as the hull ruptured and the remaining reactors exploded. The flagship that had led humanity's counterattack was gone. Jake felt tears streaming down his face, but he had no time to grieve. The Velcron fleet had lost its commander and was in chaos. Some ships continued fighting out of momentum. Others began retreating. A few even broadcast surrender signals. Jake gave orders to the human fleet to press the advantage. They could not let the Velcron regroup, or all of Nicole's sacrifice would be wasted. The battle for Earth continued for 3 more hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The occupation fleet was shattered. Velcron forces on the ground were surrendering in massive numbers. By the time the sun set over what remained of the major cities, humanity had retaken its homeworld. The cost had been terrible, but Earth was free. Admiral Hoffman broadcast a message to every human in the solar system. Her voice shook with emotion as she announced that the Velcron occupation had ended. Earth belonged to humanity again, but she also read the casualty lists. She spoke the names of ships lost and crew members who gave their lives. She talked about Nicole Brennan and the Retribution, and how they stood alone so that humanity could survive. She declared that this day would be remembered not as the day Earth nearly fell, but as the day humanity proved it could never be extinguished. In the weeks that followed, the remaining Velcron forces withdrew from human space. The Dominion had lost 2 major fleets and their war sovereign. They sent envoys requesting peace terms. They would not threaten humanity again. The war was over and humanity had won, though the victory tasted bitter given how many had died to achieve it. Reconstruction began immediately on Earth. The cities would take decades to rebuild, but humanity had time now. The Dreadnoughts patrolled the borders, ensuring no new threats emerged. Forge Station Omega expanded, becoming the center of new military construction. Additional Dreadnoughts were already being built, incorporating lessons learned from combat. Jake was promoted to Admiral and given command of the Defense Fleet. His first official act was to commission a new Dreadnought to replace the lost flagship. He named it the EWS Nicole Brennan. Amy Rodriguez was given command of the new ship, and at the commissioning ceremony she stood on the bridge looking out at the stars. She thought about everyone who died to reach this moment. She promised them silently that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. On Earth, workers clearing rubble in Geneva discovered Admiral Hoffman's command center intact beneath the debris. Inside, they found detailed records of everything that happened during the invasion and the counterattack. Among those records was a personal log from Nicole Brennan recorded the night before the final battle. She spoke about her hopes for humanity's future, and about the crew she had come to love like family. She acknowledged that she might not survive what was coming, but said it did not matter. If people were watching this recording, it meant humanity won. It meant Earth was free. It meant the species would continue. That was worth any price. The recording became required viewing at military academies. It reminded every new officer what they were fighting to protect. When people felt overwhelmed by the work of rebuilding, when they doubted humanity could recover from such devastation, they watched Nicole's final message. They remembered the 7 dreadnoughts that came from the void. They remembered that humanity does not surrender. Years passed and the scars of war slowly faded. Children grew up hearing stories of the dreadnoughts and their crews. They learned about ordinary people who became heroes when their world needed them most.